Whatever business or product you're developing, you absolutely have resources to support those who you ultimately are trying to serve through your product experience. And if you can do that in a way that is useful for audiences and sustainable for your organization, that essentially serves as brand marketing in time, but is actually doing much more than brand marketing ever could because of the credibility underneath it. What better way to encourage people to try your product than to be a product that really works?
In today's world, how does a brand break through the noise and become iconic? Join me, Jason Harris, as I speak with the world's leading marketing experts about how they use soul and science to build an iconic brand. Think of it as EQ meeting IQ. So let's lock in and together fast forward our marketing minds on the Soul and Science podcast. Welcome to the Soul and Science podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jackie Jantos, President and CMO at Hinge, the dating app designed to be deleted. And we're going to explore the soul and science of breaking up with your brand. How can that be a good thing when your brand is designed to be deleted? That's what we're going to explore. Jackie has spent 2 decades shaping some of the world's most influential brands, from Coca-Cola to Spotify and now Hinge. And she blends global strategy, emotional storytelling, and cultural insight to get to great and effective work. So we're going to explore all of that and more, and explore Jackie's background and her journey in the marketing world. Welcome to the podcast, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.
Of course. All right, Jackie, let's get into a little origin story. You know, you've obviously worked at some amazing brands, had a lot of success. How did you get into marketing? Did you study marketing? Did you fall into it?
I grew up in Tokyo, spent a lot of my formative young years traveling the world in unusual places. And oftentimes the most familiar parts of that travel were global brands that were in that particular area. So whether that's drinking a Coke in China, or my father worked for IBM, which for many years I thought meant international businessmen. So I
No
think,
way. That's so awesome. Because you traveled so much, that's what you thought it meant?
yeah, I thought it was someone who was working on a global brand who literally spent most of his time sort of out and about. And I think, when you're a kid, you really have no idea what your parents are actually doing. And so that was a big part of growing up for me in an international environment is a big part of my identity.
You know what's interesting about that is your parents also have no idea what you do. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know what your parents do, and then they have no idea what you do as their children. Like, my parents have no idea what advertising and marketing is or what we actually do.
Yeah. I mean, I think my Gen Alpha boys know that I work for a dating app, and they know that they're not old enough yet to date. But they certainly knew what Spotify was. And so there was a lot more allure around that brand when I was spending my time there. But I think this intersection of global brands and technology and culture is sort of where I have found myself for the past 25 years. And I love the creativity of the work that I do. I also love helping businesses grow and doing that in a way that feels valuable and meaningful for the communities they're creating products for.
Was that a good experience? Were you psyched to grow up in Japan?
Yes, I would. I love Tokyo. I love Japan. I think everyone should live in a country not their own or where they were born, for sure. It's an incredible learning experience, a very growthful experience, particularly for kids. I loved it. I hope at some point I'll be able to give the same experience to my boys.
Okay. And then when you got out of school, what was your first gig?
So I interned my last year in college at Ogilvy in New York. And my first gig after graduating was back at Ogilvy. I went in as a creative coordinator, working for a creative director named David Fowler. and essentially helping, organize David's creative team and do some interesting pitch oriented work, and then quickly moved into business development at Ogilvy. So I really grew up academic or professionally rather at Ogilvy, New York.
And then from there, you went to Atlanta to go to Coke.
Yes, from there I was pulled to Coca-Cola by an old friend who I had worked with at Ogilvy. So I arrived to Atlanta for this job, having never been to Atlanta before, but just kind of took the leap, and it was an incredible opportunity for me.
And how was that? What was that job going from like agency to client side to brand side?
Yeah, I think my role primarily at Ogilvy for most of my duration there was in business development. So that's really thinking about different categories, different brands, working with the senior most leaders at the organization. So you're constantly learning because you're really within a world of such experience. It was Shelley Lazarus was still there. There were really strong female leaders. It was an incredible place to learn and adapt and sort of earn a PhD in how you think about building a long-term brand. And they were, doing work for IBM and doing work for American Express, like doing work for Motorola. So it was an incredible learning environment. And, they were also doing some work for Coke outside of the US. So going into the global team at Coca-Cola, my role was primarily creative strategy and working on some of the largest creative campaigns for brand Coke in the global team there, which is quite small. So half the job is doing the work, half the job is traveling the world and helping markets understand the work and also learning from markets to influence how the work's being done in the global central team. And that was, almost 8 years of my life. And falling in love with Atlanta, meeting my partner on a dating app, getting married, all of these things, and then ultimately returning back to New York to help Spotify build its brand and sort of cement its role in culture in the US.
That's great. From there, you went to Dashlane and then Hinge.
Yeah, I was with Spotify through the IPO. Really, a lot of the iconography and representation of the brand today in the world from Spotify, including programs like Wrapped. These were all created by my team on my watch, and I'm enormously proud of
That's
the
awesome.
foundation that we put in place there. And post IPO, I decided to take 6 months to myself, which was pretty cool after all of the work that had been done. And then I did some consulting. I dropped into an organization called Dashlane for about a year and a half. And then I found myself at Hinge deep in the relationship space.
What did you do for the 6 months when you weren't doing anything? What was that like? Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, I kicked off my meditation practice at
Oh,
that time.
big
I
meditation.
did a couple of really compelling retreat type activities to sort of get my head straight, things like the Hoffman process. I also did a lot of work really thinking about. The role I wanted to play in the world and what kind of organizations I wanted to help build and grow. I think when you do this work, when you're engaged in where culture is going, you're engaged in what's happening with young audiences, because spoiler alert, culture is created by every next generation. And you start doing that work at the global scale in which I've been able to participate. I also started to feel a real sense of accountability for which brands I'm doing that work for and to what end. So I think for me, this path towards brands that have impact in the world in a way that I would like to see a brand impact the world has also been some of the compass that is driving me towards where I want to be and what kind of work I want to do. So
What do you think, Jackie, that you're particularly good at?
I think I am a magnet of sorts for people who want to use their unique skills and have impact in a way that is positive. So I think the people that I like to surround myself with are people who are different from myself, who have had different lived experiences. There is something about leading a team and being able to build the team with diversity at its core that is really empowering and can enable some of the greatest work of your career. And I think if that's the type of environment you thrive in, then for sure that is, I am a connector of people who want to do amazing work and leverage their skills, but leverage them in a way that is contributing to something positive, particularly leveraging the resources of a global brand.
Being inclusive, finding the right talent, bring that talent together.
Yes. And inclusivity begets inclusivity. If you look at the work that we put into the world from Hinge, it is really representative because the employee base at Hinge is representative of the users on our app.
I love that.
And so, in many ways, when you're actually able to do the work well and do the work in a way that's representative of the community you're trying to grow with, people join your organization looking to participate in that, and so you just get a lot of goodwill in terms of the work that you're doing, and you're able to enable other people who want to contribute to that even more. So it can be a very expansive mindset where we are constantly trying to do new things.
You went from Coke to Spotify and now to Hinge. What is a constant skill that you've brought from each of those places, maybe that you've had to use, even though the brand and the offerings are very different?
Yeah, the brand and the offerings are different. And something that's really unique is also the product development speed is different. So Coke, you're working with a product that literally hasn't changed in 130 something years and will not change, particularly when we were working on the bread and butter Coca-Cola Classic, which is the brand that I was working on. I think what I bring that is really consistent is a view on what altitude at which you need to look at the world and culture and what's changing in terms of how people are living and interacting with each other and what they care about and what their hopes and dreams are. And when you look at culture at that altitude, and then you look at the audience that you're trying to engage at a higher altitude, you end up pulling out some really profound insights that help you orient around in terms of product development, in terms of marketing, in terms of the voice and the iconography of a brand, and really all of it. So, that highest altitude of thinking through where the world is going and what sort of insights you might hook into is probably what I have brought from job to job to job.
How much is at those different roles are the work and messaging global versus and adapted locally versus created from a local perspective?
It depends on the size of the business, and what type of product you're putting into market, and which sort of audiences you're engaging in each of those markets, right? So there's a lot of nuance there. But there is absolutely a mission and a vision and a center point of the brand that is absolutely global, that everyone inside of the organization needs to feel emotionally connected to in order to understand the brand and understand its orientation in the world, and then with all of these different audiences. And then I think, depending on the complexity of your business, the answer to your question can be different. So Coke is a great example where, they often talk about the pendulum sort of swinging at Coke. There are years where the organization feels very centralized, and there are years where the organization feels really decentralized from a marketing perspective. And I think when I was there, it was probably uh, kind of right in the middle. So, Coke does this amazing thing where it creates relationships with FIFA World Cup and the Olympic Games. And those are some of the biggest and highest altitude creative programs that the organization puts on. And guess what? There are also moments every 2 years where the whole world gets pulled back on strategy, because if you want to participate in FIFA World Cup, this is the story that we're activating around it. And so there's less interpretation at a local level than there would be for other aspects of programming throughout the course of the year. So that's kind of an example of how you pull together global strategy and creative work within a large organization that is very decentralized at its core. Whereas at Hinge, we're an organization that operates in Western Europe, English speaking markets, our core markets, which are US, UK, Australia. We're about to launch in Mexico and Brazil later this year. There is a lot more consistency in what younger generations are feeling and experiencing in terms of the dynamics of relationships and identity. And so there's more consistency in terms of the central programs that are developed from our headquarter in New York. But how they're brought into the world is often through creators who have far more credibility with their unique audiences than we do. So there's adaptation that is very nuanced in how it's pulled through. But if you look at some of the work we're putting out in the world right now, we have, for example, this Hingy mascot. This is sort of a furry character that represents the app. And every time Hingy is deleted because a couple meets on Hinge, Hingy sees their demise, So that is an example of iconography and a storytelling approach that has been used and will be used in every market. So it's kind of program by program and, market by market. But for the most part, we tend to be far more centralized if there's consistency in the audience's experience at that time, and markets where there's more similarities.
What is your process for spotting those creative ideas that can really travel globally? Maybe even click down to your process for knowing a great creative idea that's going to move the needle.
Yeah, I get more excited further upstream at the strategy and insight phase. If there's an insight that feels unique, that I haven't seen work wrap its arms around, that I haven't felt come through, but it's so core to the work that we're doing. And then oftentimes that is what can translate into a piece of creative execution. For example, we have this work that we just released the second chapter of called "It's Funny." It's funny we met on Hinge, and that the strategy of around that work is really that many couples who meet on Hinge, their lives have actually crossed in some shape or form before. They just didn't know it, or they didn't seize the moment at that time, because we all know relationships timing is kind of everything.
Someone at the company went on a Hinge date recently with someone that they went to high school with, which is sort of what you're saying. Almost like what you're saying is you almost can sometimes find those people and reconnect with them, right?
Yes. And, it sort of taps into two things, the work. One is the serendipity of finding a relationship. And whether that's on Hinge or elsewhere, we're happy you find a relationship, full stop. And then there's also just sort of the language and execution. It's funny, it's funny we met on Hinge. We hear that from people all the time. It's sort of a little bit of a hedge to how surprising it is that apps can help you find a partner in a world where we know that more than half of people finding partnership are finding their partners on a dating app.
How do you think about this idea that, Hinge is more for the long-term relationship and it's designed to be deleted? And how does that factor into how you might approach things differently than the other apps?
Yeah, so Hinge is for people who are looking for an intentional relationship. So when you come on the app, the onboarding, for example, is quite long. And that is by design, because we are intentionally encouraging people who are looking for a relationship to come on through. And for those for whom that feels like too much effort, to perhaps try a different app that is less effortful. At the end of the day, we look at our core metric is great dates. And so our entire product experience is built to encourage that. So that could be providing ways to speed up your momentum in terms of back forth exchange with another person to get you out on a date. It could be following up with the survey we do, which is, did you meet? How was it? So in many ways, I think when your app is oriented towards an outcome and you want your audience to reach that outcome, which is success for them, then the success begets success. The relationship space is for us is growing. We've grown quite significantly year over year.
Yeah, you really.
And what better way to encourage people to try your product than to be a product that really works at helping people find something that they're really, really wanting to find. So that's how we think about it. And then the marketing around that is really just helping people think differently about being in an intentional relationship, lower some of the barriers for trying to be in a relationship, give tips and tricks to people, share stories that can be inspiring of how surprising a relationship might take shape, keep audiences hopeful and willing to try. Because we know ultimately if they're going to put in the work on Hinge, the odds are they're going to find a partner.
Do you have any way of modeling or determining how many long-term relationships are developed from the app?
Well, I will say there are years where we can look at, for example, the wedding section of various like newspapers and get a good read. I think, for us and what the app stands for, we are the fastest growing large dating app in a category that has some work to do. So I like to think that that's because we are supporting people and actually getting on dates and living up to the promise that we put out there.
Can you share an example of a bold creative risk that maybe paid off?
I mean, I would say right now we have been doubling down on playing in Substack for well over a year now. And that is a channel that is important to our audience. There are from book talk to romance lit, Gen Z are reading again and are reading sort of longer form content, which I love as a huge fiction nerd. And I think that is the type of platform where there isn't a natural way in for a brand, and there isn't a measurable way to look at whether that channel is working for you as a brand. But that is an example of us being keen on engaging with writers and supporting writers and knowing that love stories deserve a platform to be told, and just trying and experimenting over the course of the past couple of years primarily with this work we call No Ordinary Love, but that is basically stories of Hinge couples rewritten by a variety of writers. And so this last chapter two that we put out, literally we put all of the stories out from those writers in their Substacks. And not surprisingly, most writers have a Substack. So that's an example of something that was us experimenting and taking a risk. And we've just gotten so much additional storytelling and media around that work, and so many Substack writers reaching out to us to want to also contribute and write about love stories and people who met on Hinge.
That's a very innovative idea that you wouldn't think of a brand doing. This idea of no ordinary love, and almost thinking about it as a campaign, really, right?
Yeah, I mean, the first one was a zine. The second one was a produced book.
Starting in Substack and then creating a physical book, right?
Yes, and distributing the book to bookstores and reading clubs. I think when you have a diverse team with big creative ambition, there's, people take this thread and try to put it through so many needles in so many different spaces. So the story becomes so integrated in very unique ways simply by having a multitude of people thinking about it and partners wanting to work with us to think about it in the way that they like to play with media. It becomes really fun.
Is that something that you have to rely on your heart versus your head to do an idea like that, because it's not maybe as measurable as mid or lower funnel type of work?
You know, a little bit, but I think if you also just get into the data of where your audience are and what platforms they're engaging in, whether you can find a credible way to engage in that platform right now or not, the audience is there. And if if the content is engaging enough, and that's kind of what you're testing, like, is there a way for us to show up in Substack in a way that is additive to the platform and additive to our core audiences here and additive to writers for whom this platform was developed to serve, And if you can start to think about it with the humility of that mindset of, does the brand offer something in this channel or offer something in a useful way to our audience here, then you start to be really honest about the risks, and honest about the opportunity, and define it from that perspective.
At Hinge, values like inclusion and love are really core to the mission. How does that also show up in, I don't know, not just the marketing, but in the way the companies run from your like presidential seat?
Yeah, I mean, two of the Hinge values are empathy and courage. And I think we talk a lot about having courageous conversations, which allows you to sort of signal that you're going to communicate something that may be hard to communicate. And you may botch how you communicate it to the room, but you're going to say, I think we're missing something in this conversation because there is no one in this conversation to represent that group. And I think in many ways we're really good at practicing that. And as the president, I'm also accountable for practicing that and doing that in a way where people have visibility to me practicing that. So I give license to others to also show up in that way. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not easy, and there's no rule book. I would say there's really no rule book in how to be a transparent organization in 2025. We see so many organizations pulling back here because either they don't have much to say or they're afraid to have actual commitments in this political environment. And so I think for us, dating and relationships are really everything. And we are in service of young people finding their way in a world where their skills are atrophied if they ever existed. This is a young group that spent the lockdown pandemic years in their late teens and early 20s. Those are really experimental years for most people when it comes to relationships. So we just have to be a bit more empathetic towards the experience of our audience and a bit more courageous in where we're willing to go as an organization in supporting them. We have a program called One More Hour that is basically about supporting Gen Z founded social groups and clubs, where we're funding clubs to help people get out into environments where they're meeting each other in person. It has nothing to do with romantic relationships. It's just tapping into their desire to be in community with each other in person and build some of those skills and that confidence of coming out on your own to go to a reading club or go to a surfing experience, et cetera. So, whatever business or product you're developing, you absolutely have resources to support those who you ultimately are trying to serve through your product experience. And if you can do that in a way that is useful for audiences and sustainable for your organization, then it starts to build a bit of momentum in the market that essentially serves as brand marketing in time, but is actually doing much more than brand marketing ever could because of the credibility underneath it. So I think one of the realities is when you're building these programs, how sustainable are they intended to be? Because you might have a point of view on something, but actually it might be outside of the realities of what your business is capable of doing. So, One More Hour is a great example where it is very sustainable. The work that we're doing is both talking about the value of social connection, but really, instead of building these experiences ourselves, we're funding experiences that already exist for founders who have passion and energy to maintain the continuity of their communities. So a lot of it is just getting smarter and smarter in terms of where you can actually add impact and how you can add impact and being honest with yourselves and not trying to put your brand in a place where it's an unsustainable impact program because it's not your core business at the end of the day. Our core business is building a dating app and that serves people's needs, not standing up independent, real world experiences to help people come together. Actually, I see a lot of that's a different conversation, but a lot of brands building these real world experiences, and I don't really, I don't know that the world needs more stunty activations from brands with real resources. I would say put those resources into something that matters to your audience more than a pop up that will last for a week.
I think you hit on two really interesting things in that part of the conversation. One is that you have a business and you should not overinvest in creating another business.
Correct.
You also shouldn't value hop onto whatever the next popular thing is. You should go, what is your core value? What is your thing that you believe in, and support it that way. Those are like two kind of things that I heard, which is being value based, but also being business minded and focused. Really, it's about focus and clarity versus just trying to either jump on the next thing or create this other business because you had an idea about it. You should find those partners that are already doing it, and then you can just support it because it's core to what your beliefs are.
That's right.
Obviously there's pressure always for quarter to quarter results. And that can be harder for brands to be patient and think about long term growth. Although ultimately brands are built over time and through consistency and focus and long term growth, as you mentioned. How do you kind of think about balancing that to whatever stakeholders you have to report to?
You're right. It takes time. And it's a really good question to ask people like me who have been at organizations for 3 years plus, because I find that it takes at least a couple of years to see real signal. Because you're also building it in partnership with a whole bunch of other people, and just operationalizing that can take some time. Um, I think the reality is you always need to be sort of keeping your eye on the signals quarter over quarter, but not getting distracted by it. And, in marketing, if you were really only focusing on that today, 3 years ago, people weren't paying attention to the biggest platform that's driving so much of their decision making today, which is TikTok. So I think if you're so focused on the quarter over quarter, you're missing all of these other things that are either coming your way, and our speed within these platforms, particularly if you're thinking about younger audiences, are just it's getting faster and faster and faster. So I think it's like a philosophical thing, and I think fortunately for me at this phase in my career, I don't necessarily, I mean, it's a bit of a cop out to answering your question, but I don't necessarily have to sit inside of an organization with someone who doesn't believe in the power of brand. There's enough evidence in the world to the value of a brand built methodically and consistently, and with both understanding of your audience, understanding of the world, where the world is going over time, than there are of these brands that are just sort of haphazardly hacking growth quarter over quarter. And so in some ways, you kind of need to do both, but you cannot be distracted by the short term because you will absolutely miss out on the long term. And there are not as many examples of being so distracted by the long term that you miss out on the short term. It does catch up at some point.
No, but I think that's a very diplomatic answer, which is you believe in, you're a long-term brand builder. Obviously, the business you're working on now is doing really well and hitting those growth goals. But it's kind of like a question you don't have to answer because you're going to only surround yourself with people that also believe in that because that's the type of work you focus on. Okay, I have three more questions. We're going to hit them quickly. What's a business challenge that keeps you up at night?
A business challenge that keeps me up at night is how we build these AI sort of companion type apps
Yeah,
in a way where it is actually developing our relational skills, not supremely hindering them because of their constant sort of affirmation of us and who we think we are when we are telling an app.
that makes a lot of sense. What are you most excited about for Hinge coming up?
I mean, the way that we are beginning to leverage AI is very cool. How do we help people in moments where they lack the confidence to express who they really are? things like that, where we're able to kind of leverage technology to get behind someone to help them pull out what makes them unique in ways where another person might find them really unique and might spark a conversation.
It's using AI to give you confidence in real life situations or in communication with others.
I think it's using AI to help remind you of what might be unique around you, so I can pull more specificity about who you are and your experience out for you to share that in an environment like Hinge, so people can understand what's different and unique about you and lean into that in conversation.
That's very cool. Do you have a mantra or a quote that you live by, or something that you come back to, or that centers you, or that you think about?
I often just think to myself, slow and steady, one day at a time. I think we live in a world that can feel incredibly overwhelming day in, day out. And it is very easy to get lost in the bigness of all the things happening around us all the time. And so for me, I just try very hard to stay focused on my day to day, how I can be useful to the people within it, how I can stay focused on the work that we're doing at Hinge, and just take it one day.
I love that. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. A lot of real amazing nuggets in here. Our audience is going to really enjoy this one. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Soul and Science is a Mechanism podcast produced by Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, and Lily Jablonski. The show is edited by Daniel Ferreira with theme music by Kyle Merritt. And I'm your host, Jason Harris.